Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm also going, there we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fairy Tale Variations Jack Tales. We'll get into the character that is Jack here in a moment. But first, some general housekeeping. If you do not know me, my name is Cooper Brown with Rachel Ann Harding. I am the host of Fairy Tale Variations, and together we are Stories with Spirit. Simon Brooks asked us just a little while ago, and I had to go count that this is Fairy Tale Variation show number 17. We've been doing this almost 3 years now, and it's amazing that y'all still keep coming back to be here. So thank you all so much. Without you, I am a strange man talking to the wall in my basement. And you all make this able to be a show from literally all over the world, from all across the globe. We're all here in this same silly little Zoom room. So if you are not used to Zoom or Zoom shows, I am currently spotlit, which means you're looking at me. If you would like to look at the whole room, as it were, at the top right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little button that says View. And if you click that button, you should get the gallery view, which is a sort of Brady Bunch, Hollywood Squares, Muppet Show look, depending on your cultural reference. So you're welcome to look at that if you'd like. Some of us like to look at the whole room sometimes. Also, most of you are probably aware at this point that there are subtitles. We got asked for those some shows ago, and I try to remember to turn them on. But if you don't want that, at the bottom of your screen, there should be some buttons. It might be under the 3 little dots that say More. And if you click Captions there, you should have an option to show or hide the captions. So if you don't want to see the subtitles, that's how you hide them. If you're on an iPad, the option is under the More options in the upper right-hand corner, and then you select Meeting options because it's a little bit more buried. As we've said before, if you're comfortable turning on your video, we would love to see folks' faces. Again, we do this in Zoom meeting because we like to be able to see people. However, that does present the opportunity, if you've been with us twice now, Zoom bombers do happen. People still find it fun. I don't know why, but it sometimes happens. And in the same way, oh, yep, there we go. You get to leave, sir. Remove. There we go. Yep. See, Zoom bombers. So that happens. Someone changed their profile picture to something that I don't really want to see. So, yes, so Zoom bombers do happen, much in the same way that we would have a drunk standing up in the middle of a show. We sometimes have to kick people out. We've never actually had to stop a show. Rachel and I have gotten, unfortunately, pretty good at this job. Rachel is really good at whack-a-mole. But that does sometimes happen. So it is one of the dangers we play to be able to see people's faces, and so we want to be able to do that. But sometimes things happen. On that same note, this show, I don't know if this one is rated R. Some of the tellers were thinking about going into some dark places. This isn't intended for an adult audience. If you have children with you, be aware. I don't think this show will be particularly explicit, but there may be some places we go that are adult themed because we like to tell sometimes we have to tell stories to adults too. For those of you that haven't been with us, almost done with the spiel, clapping. Everybody's muted right now, partly so Zoom bombers can't be complete terrible people, and also so that you don't unfortunately unmute yourself and your dishes clash or your dog barks. At the end of each story, you'll see a little pop-up that says the host is asking you to unmute. If you want to click that button, if you want to give us your applause, we would love to hear it. If you would like to give us the sign language applause, we would love to take that as well. You are aware there is a chat function. It's one of the great options of Zoom, but we do ask that people don't chat during a story because one of the things is seeing that pop up on the side of the story. Us as tellers, our eyes want to turn, we want to look at it. And please don't directly chat at us during a story. We're not going to be taking notes during a story. I had one show where someone was trying to correct me that I was using highness and majesty wrong, that our crown prince uses the word your highness, not your majesty. Maybe not, maybe after the show. And then, as you can see, we are recording. A link to the recording will be sent out to everybody who has it, every ticket holder. It's an unlisted YouTube video. Please feel free to share it with your friends, but we don't just post it up on YouTube because I don't want to go through and clean it up and make it, totally perfect. So, but if you would like to watch the show again, there is that. And then lastly, I always get a couple of emails about this before a show from folks that haven't heard it before. These shows are pay what it's worth. And what we mean by that is at the end of an hour and a half of art, we're going to ask you what that was worth to you. Did you laugh? Did you cry? Did you enjoy yourself? Were you touched? And if this art meant something to you, there will be an email that will go out in 1 hour and 20 minutes, and it will have all of the links we talk about. When we ask Simon what's coming up next for him, and he tells us, that link will be in that show. So you don't have to worry about getting it out of the chat or missing it. So it'll be all there. And in that email as well, PayPal, Zelle, Venmo, we take good old-fashioned checks. Whatever way you feel you wish to contribute, we would love to see that. And if what you have to give us is your applause, we will happily accept that as well. So thank you all so much. I'm going to get out of the way finally here, and we are going to introduce our first teller and my dear friend Rachel Ann Harding, who is the other half of Stories with Spirit, the other half of this crazy thing that we do here. I'm going to bring up our first teller of the evening. Oh, nope, there we go. And oh, let's do this. There we go. Add spotlight, not replace. I'm going to get out of the way. Take it away, friends.
I am unmuted. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. It feels, I don't know about where you are, but where we are, it still feels like the middle of the afternoon, but it's time to settle in and enjoy some stories. So the first storyteller we have, now Simon has been telling stories since 1991. He has the catalog of CDs and awards to his name. He has been on the show before. If you've been following this show pretty closely, he was on our Hansel and Gretel. He's also voted most likely to dare Jack to stick a bean up his nose to see what would happen. Our first teller is Simon Brooks. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, I think. Once upon a time, there was a lad called Jack, and he lived with his mother in a very small house. And of course, they had a cow. But the cow was getting old, and their only form of income was selling some of that milk to people in the town, people in the village. And when the cow stopped giving milk, or as much milk, they knew that they had to sell the cow. So Jack tied a rope around Bess's neck, the cow, not his mother, and led him off through the forest to the town that they didn't live in. The town that they did live in, they knew that the cow would be old and they wouldn't give him as much money, but the people in the far town, they had no idea, so we could get more money for it. And on through the woods he went. But as he was going through the woods, he was probably halfway there when this little tiny guy popped up. And he looked up at Jack and he says, "No, are you selling a cow?" And he says, "Well, yes, I am." "And how much would you like for it?" "Well, I would like," and he told him how much he wanted for the cow. And the gentleman said, "Well, I can give you something worth a lot more than that." And he pulled out of his pocket a handful of beans. And Jack looked at the beans, and it seemed to him that they were changing color, almost changing shape. He was mesmerized. And before he knew it, he was holding those beans in his hand, and the wee gentleman was walking away with Bessie with the rope in his hand. Well, as Jack was making his way back home, at first he thought, "This is all right, this is okay. I've got these magic beans. These are going to be super duper, and my mom's going to be thrilled." But as he got close to his house, this knot started to grow in his stomach, and he began to think, maybe I made a mistake. And when he got home and told his mom what had happened, it was very clear that he had made a mistake. "Well, what are we going to do with these beans, Jack? We've got no food. We needed the money to buy another cow, or at least to put food." She snatched the beans from Jack's hand and threw them on. "There's no food, we might as well go to bed." And so Jack went to his room, and his mother went to her room, and they went to bed with no food. When Jack woke up the next morning, normally his room would be filled with bright, brilliant light. But that morning, the light that came into his room was dappled. He rubbed his eyes and climbed out of bed and started to get dressed. And then he opened the windows wide, and he saw these vines, these bean vines that grew up, and they twisted around and linked each other. And he looked up out of the window, and they went so high up, it was as if they were taller than the greatest redwood tree. And when he looked at the breadth of it, it was like a 200-year-old oak tree. And Jack grinned. He put on his leather boots, and they squeaked, which to him was the sound of the beginning of an adventure. And he climbed hand over hand over hand over hand up this tree, through the mist, through the clouds, until he came to this ledge. And he stepped off the beanstalk. There wasn't much more to go up anyway. And he saw this road and he followed the road to this castle. He was hungry. He hadn't eaten since the last day, and breakfast at that. He waited, and this huge woman opened the door. "Well, what are you doing here?" she said. "Well, I'm very sorry to disturb you, but I'm really hungry. Do you have any spare food, like some dry bread maybe, or anything like that? I haven't eaten since yesterday." Well, the woman looked at Jack, and she liked his manners and said, "Well, come on in then." And she welcomed him into the house, and she made him a sandwich and sat him down. She says, "You can't stay long, though, because when my husband gets back..." Well, as soon as she said that, "Quick, I've got to hide you." She took his cups and glass and threw them into the sink, and she grabbed hold of him in her huge hands, lifted open a pot, put him in it, and put the lid on top, leaving a little gap so he could breathe. And Jack stood there and sat there in the pot, looking out through the tiny little crack to see this giant man come in. "Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell children. Be them alive or be them dead. I'll grind their bones to flour to make my bread." "Oh, don't be so soft. Sit down and eat your supper," said his wife. And so he did. And they ate their meal. And at the end, when they cleared everything away, the giant vanished and came back with 3 great sacks, and he dumped them on the table. One of them he open-ended and dumped all the contents out onto the table, and Jack saw from his little hiding spot gold coins. And he watched as the giant began to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and he counted and counted and counted. He counted himself to... And Jack, when he was certain that the giant was snoring and was fast asleep, he lifted the lid carefully off, climbed out of the pot, set the lid back down, made his way across the floor, up onto the table, picked up the empty sack and put as many gold coins in it as he could carry, threw the sack over his shoulder, made his way out the castle, down the beanstalk, and his mum was waiting for him at the bottom, absolutely livid. "Where have you been, Jack? I've been worried sick about you. What's going on? What have you got over your shoulder?" "Oh, I found some gold, Mum." And he handed her the sack. You found, where did you find this, Jack?" "Oh, I just found it lying around." Half truth or an outright lie? She'd brought him up better than that. "Nobody leaves gold lying around, Jack. Wherever you got this, you take it back tomorrow. Now come on inside. I made some supper. We had some food. I was able to do some weaving." And so that night, Jack had a meal, and then they both went to bed. His mother telling him the next day he has to return that sack of gold. The next day, the dappled light was still coming in through the window. He got dressed, put his leather boots on, and they squeaked, and it sounded like the beginning of an adventure. And he climbed up and up and up the beanstalk to that ledge. He got off the ledge and made his way into that castle and hid in that same pot and waited. And sure enough, the giant reappeared. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, bones, flour, bread, yes, "No, dear, no one's come to the house. Sit down and eat your supper." "All right, dear." And they ate and they ate, and then they cleared the dishes away. And then after the meal, the giant went off and came back with this goose. Now, at first, it looked like a regular goose. Jack, peering from beneath the lid, watched as the giant said, "Lay, my precious." And the goose landed between its legs on the table. And again, the giant looked at the goose and said, "Oh, my precious, lovely, lovely, lay me another egg." Another golden egg. And Jack watched as egg after egg was laid until the giant eventually fell asleep. And Jack climbed out of the pot, put the lid back, made his way up onto the table, looked at all of these golden eggs. but he liked animals. And so he gently brushed the beak of the goose, then wrapped his hands around the face of the goose, lifted it up, put it under his arm, and made his way out of the castle, down the beanstalk where his mum, where have you been? What have you got now? That bag of money is still sitting on the kitchen table. I told you to take it back up. What are you doing? What is that goose? Oh, it's a special goose, Mum. I found it. Found it? Found it where? The same place you found the gold coins? Well, no, Mum, look, look. And he set it down on the ground and said, lay. Oh, another golden egg. Jack, I don't know where you're getting these things, but you have to take them back tomorrow. And don't bring anything with you. She had food on the table. They ate. They went to bed. The next morning, Jack, leather boots, out the window, up the beanstalk to the castle. This time, he didn't hide in the same pot. He was smart enough to know that twice, maybe, but 3 times, nah. So he found a really good hiding spot, and he waited. And when the giant came in, fee, fi, flour, bread, yum, his wife, I bet I know it's that little boy that came that other day. And she went straight to the pot and lifted the lid. And then they looked in other pots. They looked in cupboards, but they did not find Jack. Jack had hidden himself so well. So they finished eating. And the giant, with his beautiful harp, he set it on the table. The soundboard had this beautiful carving out of a woman's face. And when the giant said, play for me, my precious, and the harp began to play itself, the face, that wooden face, came to life and began to sing. It was the most beautiful voice that Jack had ever heard. And the songs were perfect in every way. And the giant fell asleep. And Jack crept out of his hiding place, made his way up to the table, lifted the harp, placed it under his arm, and started to make his way out of the castle when the harp called out, Master, we are being stolen, we are being stolen. Well, the giant woke up. Jack took off. The giant saw Jack running. He stood up and stumbled over his own chair, fell against another chair, and Jack was already coming down the beanstalk, almost 1/3 of the way down before the giant even got to the top. Jack was halfway down, calling out to his mother, the harp under his arm, still calling out, Mom, Mom, cut the beanstalk down, get it down now. She could barely hear him. But she ran into a shed, she got a sharp axe and began to hack and cut at the beanstalk. And by the time Jack came down to the bottom and handed her that harp that was still crying out, he took the axe from her and with all of his might cut and cut and cut into that beanstalk until it started to fall. But the giant, turns out he was pretty agile. He'd been practicing parkour. And he leapt off the beanstalk and landed like a cat on the ground. He made his way towards Jack, whose eyes were getting smaller, and his mother, who was looking at this huge man. Jack, is this where you go? Not now, Mom, not now. The giant looked down at them. I should teach you a lesson. I should take you to the constable. I should have you thrown in jail. Jack's mother started to weep. What are you crying for? It's just me and my son, she said. I've tried to teach him everything that I can, but it's just the 2 of us. Her words went to the giant's heart, and he looked at the 2 of them, and he said, I tell you what, you need a father figure. Why don't I take you under my wing and teach you the right way to do things? The mother couldn't believe what she was hearing. Jack looked at his mother and the giant. What you mean you can, after all, I know what it's like to be in your position. And the giant took Jack under his wing, under his huge arms, and taught Jack the right thing to do. And Jack and his mother never were poor again. The end.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Oh, Simon.
Bravo!
Hey, Simon. Wonderful.
Wow.
Lovely, lovely.
What a fun, different ending.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, it is.
Nice.
Your imitation of a goose laying an egg was hysterical.
Yes,
She's
perfect.
hysterical.
Yes, I went and studied that for a while to get it right.
Well, the training, it shows. It shows.
Good. I'm glad.
And you'll have to unmute again.
Yeah, Simon, if you're on mute. So what's happening? What's going on in your world? Where can people find more of your work?
Well, you can find more of my work on my website. The easiest way to get to my website is simonbrooksstoryteller.com. That does redirect to Diamond Scree, but yeah, that's me, the English fella and storyteller. Diamond Scree is my website. You can go there, simonbrooksstoryteller.com, and I have free videos and audios, and you can buy stuff, and you can book me, and I got a very busy summer working at camps and libraries and places like that. And then in the fall, I've got a gig out in Athens, Alabama, at the Storytelling Festival there, which I'm really looking forward to going to. And of course, the three of us, Paul Strickland, myself, and Ingrid Nixon, are all part of TBD Storytellers. And the last Tuesday of every month, we have a little concert. So you can look us up, TBD Storytellers, and come and see us doing our thing there as well, online.
That's fabulous. Yeah, those online shows are fantastic because anybody here can go to those shows. They're online and you get this fabulous lineup. That link will go out in the email that goes out at the end of the show. Thank you for starting us off, Simon.
Bring it back.
I think we have our next teller who's going to pop up here in just a moment. Oh yeah, because it's the same screen. Ooh, what's this? So those who don't know, Paul Strickland, he's well known on the Fringe Festival circuit, and now he's busting onto the storytelling scene as he is a featured teller at both the National Storytelling Festival and the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival in Utah. And those who don't know, those are the two biggest festivals in the States. So they are going to have a treat with him at their event, and they've got a bunch of other festivals that I think he's going to as well. Now, those who have been following the show, he's been on both Rumpelstiltskin and Sleeping Beauty. He was voted most likely to get into a line contest with Jack, but bookies don't really know who to favor when it would come to who would win. So tonight, he's going to be telling us another Jack story.
Thank you so much, Rachel Ann. Appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Thank y'all so much for having me on this. So I want to tell a story about a different Jack. It's kind of the multiverse of Jacks is what we're doing here tonight. And so this is a little bit of a different Jack. This is actually from an original tale, from a traditional tale called Jack and the Bull, but my retelling of it is called Jack and the Bee Side. Once back a long time ago, I mean, this was back when giants did not yet have basketball or parkour, apparently, to do. This was back then, so all they had to do was cause trouble. You know, this was back when week-old news was not yet an endangered species. This was back a long time ago when there was a boy named Jack. And Jack was very hungry and very poor. And yet he was somehow able to still be kind, which it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, if I miss a single meal, first thing my body does is start eating all of my manners. So somehow Jack was able to still be a kind child, even though he was hungry and poor. This is how kind Jack was. Even back in those times, Jack would tip his hat 80%, even though back then a 10% tip was customary. Now, Jack had a bull, and this was Jack's prized possession, mostly because it wasn't really a possession. It was really his friend. And one day, Jack and the bull were hanging out, and Jack was feeling real hungry. And the bull was feeling a little bit concerned because it felt like Jack's parents were looking at that bull and just seeing nothing but steaks. And so Jack looked at his bull and he said, "How you doing today, bull?" And the bull said, "Meh." And Jack said, Did you just moo? And the bull said, "No, I said meh." That's how hungry Jack was. His bull talked back. "No, I said meh." Oh. So bull, you think we're going to make it out of this whole thing okay? I don't know, Jack. Jack, You seem deliriously hungry. Yeah, well, you know what I was just thinking? I was thinking I wish life were more like an ice cream sandwich, Bull. You know, that's not a metaphor or anything. I just have never had a bad ice cream sandwich. And yeah, I guess maybe I'm a little hungry. Jack, have you ever looked at the horns on my head and wondered if they can be unscrewed? Bull, are you deliriously hungry? And they both laughed and they laughed and they laughed. In fact, they laughed so hard that when that bull's head came back up, one of his horns was actually 6 inches off center of the other horn. And that gave Jack an idea. So he went around and he grabbed a hold of that left horn and he started turning it. And sure enough, it unscrewed. It went all the way, it went around again. Finally, the bull pulled away and said, Jack, 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 Jack. It's child safety threaded like a pill bottle. You got to push it in first. And Jack knew a thing or two about pill bottles because of his parents, which is probably maybe a little bit why he was a little hungry and poor. So Jack walked right up and he pushed that horn in and he turned it and it came right off. And inside of that horn was delicious ends meat. Gorgeous, delicious ends meat right out. It was sushi grade ends meat because you wouldn't believe me if I told you that it was cooked inside that horn. And Jack ate a bunch of the ends meat that his parents seemed to never be able to make. He ate a bunch of that ends meat and then he was feeling good. So he stuck that horn back on and he turned it and it clicked right into place. And now that bull's horns were right up where they were supposed to be. But then, of course, Jack got to looking at the right horn. So he went around and he pushed in on the right horn and he turned it and it came right off and plop, out came the owner's manual for the bull that Jack's parents had clearly never read. Now, at this point in the story, most people do not believe what I'm about to say, but it's absolutely true. Jack read the owner's manual. He read it from cover to cover because he wanted to figure out what to do with that right horn. And that owner's manual said the thing to do with that right horn, you take that right horn, you find yourself a black puddle, you find yourself a stick, and you take that stick and you put it in that black puddle, and then you twirl that black puddle around at 78 revolutions per minute. You twirl that black puddle around, and then you stick the very end of that horn down onto the surface of that twirling around black puddle. And then this song came out. Can y'all hear the guitar okay? Yeah? Come on, let's go up the road a ways. I got no bags to pack. I got no goodbyes to say. Our fortune's up ahead, and even if it's sour, even if our fortune is poor, at least it'll be ours. So come on, let's go one step at a time, 'cause hopping would be a harder way to travel, and I'm already tired and I'm underfed. So come on, let's go. Our future's up ahead. And if we find wishes, let's not waste them on stars, 'cause where we are coming from, there's no telling if we're gonna make it that far. We're seeking our fortune, that's what we must pursue. But if you're not born with a fortune, then seeking one's the best thing that you can do. So come on, let's go up the road a ways. I got no bags to pack. I got no goodbyes to say. Is geographical happiness real? It ain't clear, but happiness is, and man, it ain't here. So come on, let's go up the road a ways. And then Jack pulled that horn off of that puddle. And then he walked right over to that bull and then turned back and looked at the puddle. And then he looked at the bull, and then he looked at the puddle. He wanted to listen to the B side, but he couldn't figure out how to turn the puddle over. So he went and he put that horn up on that bull, and he pushed it in, and he turned it around until it clicked. And then he looked down in the grass, and there was the owner's manual. So he reached up and he pushed the horn in and he turned it around until it came off again. He put the owner's manual back where it belongs. I'm an uncle. He put the owner's manual back where it belongs, and then he put the horn back on there, turned it, and now that bull's horns were back up where they were. And so Jack jumped on top of that bull, and they headed out, inspired by the lyrics in that tune. And they walked and they walked. They walked for about 30 minutes. They walked for about 30 minutes before, "Are we there yet?" And the bull said, "Oh, Jack, 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 Jack. We are not at our fortune yet." And about 30 more minutes went by, and Jack said, "Hey, are we there yet?" And the bull said, "Jack, Jack, Jack, Jack. We are not at our fortune yet. If it only took an hour to find our fortune, Jack, then this path will be slammed full of bulls and children. So no, we are not there." Another hour went by. Jack said, "Are we there?" And the bull said, "Jack, do not make me turn myself around." Well, eventually, Jack matured into a good traveling companion. And he and that bull traveled around from place to place. And everything was going fine, it seemed. Until one day, Jack and the bull were drinking out of a stream. And Jack looked over and he saw some blue bubbles popping up around where the bull was drinking out of that stream. Some blue bubbles just popping up. And Jack didn't know what to make of that. And the bull stared at those blue bubbles for a while before he said, "Jack, this is bad news. Apparently there's a lot more blue in me than I thought. What this means is that tomorrow we're going to run up against another bull, or what looks like another bull. Really, it's just my blue self. And I'm going to have to do some battle with myself, Jack. And I think I can make it. I think I can beat that blue self bull, but just in case I don't." And Jack said, no, of course you're going to make it. You have to make it." Loved his bull. He only understood, which is so often the case, ain't it? Well, the next day, Jack and the bull were walking down the path, and sure enough, in the path, there was that bull. That blue bull was stamping its feet, and it was snorting through its nose, and it was just waiting. And Jack's bull said, "Jack, you need to climb off and climb up in a tree, and I'm going to fight this bull." And Jack said, "Nope, I'm not going anywhere." And Jack's bull said, "Jack, I need you to let me do this myself. So climb off and climb up in a tree. Just the fact that I know that you are here for me is the most you can do." So Jack did that. And that bull and his blue self locked horns, and they fought and they fought and they rolled and they fought and they fought and they rolled until finally Jack's bull was victorious. He was exhausted, but he won. And he lay in the grass, eating some of that grass. Jack climbed down and took off that left horn, ate some ends meat. And then things seemed to be all right for a while. And man, I wish I could tell you that that was the only battle that Jack's bull had to do with his blue self. In fact, this is a fairy tale. I wish I could tell you that Jack's bull only had to fight his blue self 3 times. But the fact of the matter is, Jack's bull ended up fighting his blue self basically every hour of basically every day. And then one day, Jack was drinking out of a stream and then looked up, and Jack's bull was just staring at the stream. And when Jack looked back, Jack just saw a brook full of blue bubbles. And Jack's bull said, "Jack, I don't think I'm gonna make it. I mean, every time I fight my blue self, it seems to get stronger and I seem to get weaker. So tomorrow when we run up against this blue bull, if I don't make it," Jack said, "Of course you're gonna make it. You have to make it. Of course you're gonna make it." Jack, just listen for a second. If you love me, just listen for a second. If I don't make it, it is important to me that you take my 2 horns and the 2 black spots on my hide when you go. And Jack said, but you're going to make it, right? Well, you are going to make it. And the bull said, if you find wishes, then reach for the stars. Because a child like you, there's just no telling how far you can go. So just keep going. Boy, your fortune will appear. I wish I could see it for myself, but I have to close my eyes here. And the bull closed his eyes and he laid down on the road and was gone. And I bet you thought there was going to be another battle that you would see, just like Jack thought that there was going to be another battle. But y'all, the truth of the matter is, we don't see half of the battles. And Jack, he reached down and he grabbed those two horns just like he'd been asked. And he stuck them under his arm. And he took those two black spots off that bull's hide and he got to walking. And about 30 minutes into his walk, he thought to himself, man, I really wish I could give my parents another chance. And just like that, he was back at the farm. And he looked around and he looked in his hand and there was only one black spot left. He still had those two horns. And his parents were there and they were so happy to see him. And yeah, they had a lot of work to do, but they didn't take that wish that Jack wished for granted. They did a lot of work. And y'all, things got a lot better for Jack. Took that other black spot, that other pocket for a while. And he would wonder sometimes, should I wish for a castle? Should I wish for all the gold in the world? And then one day, he reached in his back pocket and he knew exactly what he wanted. And he wished for his bull back. And sure enough, he looked up and that bull came walking toward him. This bull had no horns. And it did have two black spots on his back, though. As Jack walked with his bull into the woods and found a stick and a black puddle. And he pulled out that bull's right horn and twirled that puddle around at 78 revolutions per minute. And he and his bull got to listen to the B side. Wherever you go, child, just make sure you stay. 'Cause wherever you are, the world is a better place with you in it either way. Sometimes you'll feel wishless, won't know what to do. Just remember the star you could be wishing on might be walking next to you. So come on, let's go up the road a ways. The world's so much reflection. Your fortune's up ahead. You know what to do. Come on, let's stay. I'll stay right next to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wow.
Love the music.
Hey.
Thank you.
Love the cocktail chords too.
That was so nice. I was beside myself.
Something
Thank you all so
totally
much.
original.
No way.
Sorry, I had to mute everyone.
Oh, Paul. Look what you did. That was really touching and lovely.
Thank
Where
you.
can people find more of you? What do you
Well,
up to?
Yeah, so the TBD group that Simon mentioned, we do shows every month, so you can find us online there. And you can go to my website, which is talkingpaul.com, or it is ain'ttrue.com. It's both. And they both go to the same website, so you don't have to go to both. But if you want to, just have me up on 2 tabs. And I will also be traveling through Canada doing the Winnipeg, Saskatoon, and Edmonton Fringe festivals. And then I'm going to do a little Pacific Northwest sort of house show tour. My partner, Erica McDonald, and I, we're going to be doing some shows. She'll be doing some shows that I play guitar on. And then I'll be doing some storytelling as well. And then Timpanogos in September, and then the National in October. So, yeah.
That's a busy schedule, but it sounds like a really exciting one.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm excited about it. It's good.
Yeah, thank you for joining us this afternoon, evening.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. This is always such a blast, y'all.
This is wonderful. So our next teller coming up here, so those of you who don't know, this is Cooper's decade year. He has been a storyteller for a decade as of this year, which is fabulous. And he's consistently contributing to the storytelling community. During the pandemic, he was the force behind us getting online and moving these shows forward. And he's been on the show a couple times. I'm not going to name all the shows he's been on because that would take a little more time than we want to take. But he was also voted most likely to go with Jack on an adventure and live to tell the tale. But he's got a story for us this evening. Why do I keep saying that? He's got a story for us this evening.
Sun's still up here. All right, friends, thank you. I realized I didn't actually sort of introduce Jack. And also just, I know some folks joined us late. For those of you that joined us late, we do ask that people don't chat during the stories. Me especially, every time I see it pop up, my eyes want to pull to that side of my screen. So thank you for holding your chat, like your applause, till the end. So Jack is this character. He's an English character. Shows up in Ireland, in Scotland, and then he came to America. And the Jack tradition in America is the deep Appalachian storytelling tradition, is the stories of this character. And he pops up everywhere. And as you've already seen, he's a fool, but he's clever, and he's kind, and he's young. And sometimes he's old. There are old Jack tales. I don't think anyone's doing one tonight, but one of my favorite stories is a story of how Jack went to school, and he went to school when he had grandchildren. But this story that I'm going to share with you tonight comes from Jamaica. It was collected by Margaret Warren Beckwith and published in 1924 in a book called Jamaican Anansi Stories. And she did a collection that were a mix of African stories, but mingled with the stories of the Irish indentured servants that were also on the plantations in Jamaica. And it's a story that in the original uses both pounds and dollars and feels like an English Jack story, and yet we find it in Jamaica. And so the stories, they travel, and Jack travels. And so thank you for being with us tonight. Now, once upon a time, there was a fellow named Jack. Now, when I tell this story without my friends, I say you've probably heard of Jack before, and you already have. Heard him go up the beanstalk. You've heard him invent records. And if my Jack was either of the Jacks you've heard about tonight, I can't tell you. But he was a man of their ilk, more clever than he was wise, and oftentimes just stupid. And most Jack stories, they start when Jack's mama kicked him on out of the house, and he set on off to seek his fortune. Well, my Jack had found his fortune, or something near like it. Her name was Kitty. And together they settled in on a little farm just outside of town. And our story begins one morning when Kitty woke Jack up. Jack, you've been saying for a week that come market day, you wanted to take that cow on down to the market as she's starting to grow dry, and you wanted to sell her while she still had some worth left in her. And it is market day, my love. Well, Jack tried to go to sleep, but Kitty was insistent, and he got up, he rubbed his eyes, he drank his tea, he took that cow by the halter, but she took him by the hand. Jack, you know that cow still has some worth in her. You promise me. You promise me you're not to get less than 20 pounds for her. You hear? And he promised. And down the road he went. Now, I must tell you that in this same town where Jack and Kitty lived, there were 3 fellows, all by the name of Jimmy. And these 3 fellows had what you might call an ailment about them, or if you were being superstitious, you might even call it a curse. For any time someone so much as mentioned the word work, or God forbid hard labor, they felt a tremble come into their hands, their knees began to shake, their stomachs began to tie themselves into knots, and they found there was no cure for this ailment, but strong drink and good food and a nap would cause the symptoms to subside, and being as they could make no honest living, they fell into lying and stealing and cheating to make their way in the world. And when they saw Jack coming up over that hill with that cow, they figured they'd have that cow off Jack and they'd make a little scratch in the bargain. And he had just reached the bottom of that hill when he met that first fella named Jimmy coming along the road. Jack, that is a fine goat you got there. Why, I was thinking to myself, my nanny goat, she died not too long ago, and I was thinking of heading down into market to pick up a new goat, but if you're going down there now, I'd buy yours off you right here. What do you say to a pound, Jack? I mean, you might get more in market, but I'd save you the long trip. Jimmy, this is a cow. Kitty says I'm to take the cow down to market. I'm not to get less than 20 pounds for it. Jack, mate, that is, I will say, a fat goat. But if you try to pass that there goat off as a cow, why, people will be laughing about this for years, mate. Don't you tell me later that I didn't warn you. Jack, he shrugged it off and he headed on down the road, and he'd just come around that big bend in the road when he met that second fella named Jimmy, who was leaning against a tree having himself a bit of a smoke. And, oh, Jack, that's a fine goat you got there. And Jimmy's goat, she died not too long ago, and Jimmy and I were thinking of going in for a new nanny goat for him, his birthday coming up and all. And if you're heading down to town, I'd buy her off you right here. What do you say to 2 pounds? It's a good price for a goat. Jimmy, Kitty says that this is a cow, and I'm to get no less than 20 pounds for it. Mate, you know your wife. You know her. You know her jokes. This is one of them grand jokes Kitty does, right? Oh, it's a good one too. And I have a thought to let you go forth and have everybody laughing at you for years over this. But mate, take the money. Now, Jackie shook it off. And down the road he went until he came to that little bridge that crosses the stream, and you're right into town, and there's that third fella named Jimmy doing a little fishing over the bridge. And he smiled to see Jack. Jack, mate, it's good to see you. Wait, you taking your goat into market? Jimmy and I were thinking of picking up a goat for Jimmy. His birthday's coming up and his nanny goat died and all. And what do you say to 3 pounds? You're not to get 3 pounds in market, and we're old pals. I'd give it to you here. And Jack was so befuddled that he traded his cow to that third fella named Jimmy for 3 pounds, and he was away home. Now, Kitty knew that any time Jack got home early from anything, something terrible had happened. And when she saw him coming up the lane, she put her head out the window. And how was the market, Jack? And did Miss Withers have the nice peach jam? And how was the selling? And did you get a good price? And oh, he lit in. If it wasn't for those 3 fellas named Jimmy and you giving me a fat goat to pass off as a cow and everybody laughing at me. And when she got him calmed down and got that story up one side and down the other, she didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. No. Don't you set a foot into this house. Jack, where were you the day God was handing out brains? Oh, my love. Get down to town. Get the cow back or the 20 pounds or so help me. Well, Jackie turned himself around, and he went on back down to town, and he did the first thing that came to his mind. He went into the pub, and he ordered up a pint of stout, and he had himself a long drink and a long think. And when he was done, he called to the barman, Murph, how much for one of them bottles of whiskey there behind the bar? A pound, Jack? And I'd throw in the stout if you like. Oh, thank you, Murph. And Jack dug out one of those pound notes, and he put it there on the counter. Oh, but would you wait until I come back? I have some friends I'd like to treat, and I don't want to be carrying the whiskey around all day. Sure, whiskey, Jack. I'll keep it here behind the bar as long as you like. Thank you, Murph. And Jackie went out the door. And down the road he went to the second pub in that town. Again, he ordered up a bottle of whiskey. He paid down one of those pound notes, and he asked the barman to keep it until he come back. And at the third pub, he's done the same. And then he went to find those 3 fellas named Jimmy. who in the meantime had sold Jack's cow to the first old codger they'd met for 17 pounds, 6 shillings, 9 pence, and 3 beans, which Jimmy put into his left front pocket. And they had taken the proceeds, and they were eating and drinking at a fine cafe. They had crepes and croissants and little cups of espresso, and they saw Jack coming on down the road, and they began to squirm, thinking that maybe he was on to them. But a big old smile split Jack's face. Fellas, I am in debt to you. If it wasn't for you three, and it took all three, you're right, why, everyone in town would be laughing at me for years to come, trying to pass off a goat as a cow. Kitty, that's my wife for you. That's my wife for you. And I thought in thanks, I might buy y'all a drink. Now, these three men were never one to turn down the medicine for their ailment, as it were, and they finished their espresso and their croissants, and soon enough they were off to the pub. And they sat themselves down there by the fire, and Jax called for a bottle of whiskey, and they poured out the drinks, and they sung songs, and they told jokes. And when all was said and done, Jack took his hat off his head. He smacked it down there on the table. He cried out, "It's paid for then!" Murph looked up from behind the bar. "You're right, Jack, it is." And Jack's out the door with those three fellas coming after him. And Jack, what was that? You didn't pay Murph any money. And Murph is a man to keep a tab. Fellas, don't you know? You don't know? Oh, this is me magic hat. It was my father's hat. He said it was my grandfather's hat, but the fashion ain't right. I think it was my father's hat. And anywhere I go, I order up food, I order up drink. When I'm done, I just take my hat off my head. I slap it down there on the table. I cry out, "It's paid for then." And they can't charge me a penny. No one ever's been able. You don't believe me? No. Surely you just saw it. You fellas want another drink? Now those three fellas turned on their heels so quickly that Jack had to catch them by their coattails to stop them from sprinting back into Murph's pub. Now, fellas, you see, the problem is, I don't like to go into the same place over and over and over. Murph's a friend of mine. I don't want to bankrupt the man. But, the second pub's just down the way. And off they went. And they sat themselves there, and all transpired as it did before. They called for the bottle of whiskey. They sung songs. They told jokes. And when it was done, Jack took his hat off his head. He smacked it down there on the table. He cried out, "It's paid for then." And the barman agreed. And Jack's out the door with those three fellas coming after him. Does it just keep, doing its thing, Jack? Oh, yeah. Works as many times as you like. Now, at the mention of that word work, those three fellas, they felt their hands begin to tremble and their knees began to shake. And Jack, seeing their ailment come upon them, he took them by the elbows, being the good man that he was, and he led them off to seek relief. And at the third pub, he sat them down. They drunk down the whiskey. Took his hat off his head. He smacked it down. He cried out, "It's paid for then." Now, that barman was a rather surly fella. He just grunted, but Jack took that as acknowledgement, and out the door he went with those three fellas coming after him, sticking their hands down into their pockets. "Jack, how much would you take for your hat?" "What? I've got me 10 pounds here, Jack. Would you take 10 pounds for your hat?" "Jack, don't you listen to Jimmy. I got 15 pounds. 15 pounds I'm prepared to give you right now. Jack, don't you listen to these two fellas. I have 25 pounds I'll put against your hat right now." "Well, fellas, this hat is mighty sentimental to me. It was my father's hat. He said it was his grandfather. I couldn't let it go for less than 50 pounds. Now, those three fellows put their heads together. And then they put their money together. And they paid Jack there in the street. And he's handed on over that magic hat. Now, when Kitty saw Jack coming up the lane, reeling, and from 50 yards away through the open window she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "My love, Jack, what is it? You're off to the pub to get drunk. Where's the money, Jack? Where's the cow?" And Jack, there before the open window of his kitchen, like a magician, began to stick his hands down into his pockets and count out onto the windowsill in coins and small bills, not 10 pounds, not 20 pounds, but 50 pounds. And when Kitty had got that story up one side and down the other, she didn't know whether to laugh or to cry, so she did a bit of both, and then, well, she started into kissing on Jack. And as they were, making it up, as it were, those three fellows made their way to the finest restaurant in all that town. And there they ordered up a goose with all the trimmings. They had all the sides they could wish, bottles of wine, and they ate and they drank. And just as they were finishing their tiramisu, up comes the waiter with the bill. And that first fellow named Jimmy, he looked at it, he put it down, he took that hat off his head, he gave a big old smile, he smacked it down on the table, crying out, "It's paid for then." "No, sir, it is not." Now that second fellow gave him an elbow. "You done it wrong. It's paid for then." "No, sir, it is not." And the third fellow, he began to bang that hat on the table, crystal and china and silver flying every which way, crying out, "It's paid for, it's paid for, it's paid for." At which point the manager arrived and suggested that perhaps they might need the assistance of the constable, and at the mention of the constable's name, those three fellows began to put their hands down into their pockets. But having given Jack all of their money, they had not between them the price of the meal. And they spent the rest of that night scrubbing pots and scouring pans with their hands shaking and their knees knocking and their stomachs turning themselves inside out. And at the end of the night, they decided there was nothing for it but to kill Jack. But not being the kind of fellows to do any sort of strenuous murdering after a night like that, they decided to sleep it off, and they would kill Jack in the morning. And those three fellows had not yet boiled the water to make their tea when the news reached Jack and Kitty that they were coming to kill him. Now, Kitty, she put down her tea and she looked across the breakfast table. "And what's your plan now, oh wise one?" "Well, my plan is to go back to bed and have a bit of a snooze. When they come, you tell them I'm dead." And Jack went back to bed. Kitty gave a laugh and started doing the dishes, and when those three fellas started coming up the road, she took herself an onion, she cut it in half, she took a big old whiff, and when they pounded on the door calling for Jack to come out so that they might kill him, she opened it up, the tears streaming down her face. "Fellas, you're a bit late. Why, wasn't it just last night he was coming home, he was staggering drunk, I don't know where he could have been or who he was with, and he slipped on the cobblestones and he cracked his head and he's dead." They pushed their way in to make sure Jack wasn't faking. And they found him there, laid out on the bed in his finest suit with his arms crossed over his chest and his walking stick right there at the end of the bed, dead as a doornail. And that first fella named Jimmy, he felt the tears begin to form in the corners of his eyes and begin to drip down his nose. Jack, mate, you could have waited. We'd have done the job for you, Jack. We could have waited. You didn't have to do it yourself." And he took up that stick and he gave Jack a crack across the head. And didn't Jack sit bolt up in bed and look him straight in the eyes? Fellas, wasn't I just there? It was all white clouds and golden light and music and the St. Peter and St. Paul and the good Lord Jesus himself. And he'd poured out all those glasses full of water. And he was going to turn them into wine, and we were going to have the grandest party you could ever imagine. But, thanks for bringing me back. It's, I've got a powerful amount of living left to do. At the befuddled looks on the faces of the three Jimmies, and Kitty desperately trying to conceal her laughter behind her tears, Jack explained. "Didn't Kitty tell you?" "Oh, she didn't." "Oh, we'll have words about this later. That's me stick of life you've got right there. It was my grandfather's stick. He said it was his grandfather's stick before him. All you've got to do is crack a corpse across the head and they sit bolt upright, as you see me doing now. When I was a young man, I made my way all across 5 counties around. I'd stop in at a wake or a funeral. I'd have a little punch. I'd smoke a little smoke. I'd eat some cake. And then when I was done, I'd take up my stick. I'd give the corpse a good crack over the head. I'd say, 'Get up, corpse.' And they'd get up. And they'd pay me good money." Now that fella named Jimmy began to look with renewed interest at the walking stick in his hand. And those 2 other Jimmies and him put their heads together, and they began to consider that cracking corpses about the head and eating cake and drinking punch and smoking smoke was a fine way to go about, and if people would pay you for the privilege, that it would be a good way to live one's life. And soon enough they were asking Jack how much he'd take for his stick. And would he do it on credit? Now, fellas, that was my grandfather's stick, and maybe even his grandfather's before him. And, I couldn't let it go, not for less than £100. Now, they told Jack to wait right there. And they ran their way back down to town, the only running they'd been seen to do in 10 years, easy. And there they sold their coats and they pawned their watches and they dug coins out of the tips of their shoes and they stole candy money from children. And soon enough, they were back. And Jack, being the good fellow that he was, he gave them that stick, for the bargain price of 93 pounds, 7 shillings, 9 pence, and the 3 beans from Jimmy's left front pocket. And you see, my story, it could end there, with a hot water bottle for Jack's head and a cup of tea and a good laugh. If the very next day, the news had not come round that town that the king's daughter had died. And those 3 fellas named Jimmy, sitting there sipping their tea, they began to talk to one another, thinking, what might be the reward for a man that could bring the princess back from the dead? And without even eating their porridge, they were down the road until they came to the castle. And there they spoke to the man at the door, and he spoke to the man at the inner door, who spoke to the chamberlain, and soon enough they were being invited in as 3 wandering magicians there to bring the princess back from the dead. And they were showed in. She was laid out all in state and without a word or a warning. That first fella named Jimmy took up that stick, and he began to batter the princess about the head and the shoulders, crying, "Arise, princess, arise!" And, well, the other 2 fellows had a go at it as well. And when it became apparent to everyone, save perhaps the 3 Jimmies, that she was no closer to arising, but rather some closer to decomposing, the king had them marched off to the deepest and darkest of his dungeons, where it in fact can be said that he did give them what they wished, for they did not a scrap of work between them all the rest of their very short lives. Thank you.
Woohoo! Brilliant.
Excellent.
Whoa. That's so well done.
Loved it. Cooper.
Oh my God.
Cooper, you're amazing.
Great.
Beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Oh.
Yes, sir.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Fun.
Yes.
So fun.
Bravo, bravo.
Bravo.
There we go. Hello, friends.
Well, I haven't heard that story in a while. It's good to hear it again. Cooper, what are you up to next?
I'm taking a little time off. There's nothing really planned for the rest of the summer. Anne and I are in some conversation about where we're going next and what plans for the fall are right now. But if stuff comes up, if you're not on the mailing list, please join us. The link to that will go out. But it will go out as usual on the mailing list. We'll see what pops up and see what I'm working on. There's some irons in the fire, but nothing so much yet. So
Fantastic. Who's our next teller?
Friends, I would like to welcome you to reintroduce my friend and co-conspirator, Rachel Ann Harding, the other half of Stories with Spirit. Rachel won a Regional Excellence Award from the National Storytelling Festival last year. Am I allowed to talk about the thing that's about to happen?
The thing that's about to happen.
Big news is that in about a month and a half, there will be a new storyteller in the world as Rachel will be giving birth. So that's the big news coming up, I think. And so we are so happy to welcome that new member of the storytelling tribe into the world. So Rachel of us was voted the most likely to be the woman from whose garden Jack will be stealing the greens that will precipitate the whole ensuing story. So, my good friend, take us away.
So, before I get started, this is going to be the one time I ask you to use the text during the text box during the story, because this is a Jack show. We kind of have to shake it up just a little bit. You will know the prompt. The prompt will be, I'll need a magic word. I'll need a magical word that Jack will use in the story. So I want you to think about that. You don't need to put it in the text box now. I'll be asking for it in a little bit. But just so you're ready, if you have a specific magical word that you use or like to use when you're making magic, that'll be a request. But this, I appreciated Paul's statement that this is the multiverse of Jacks. Because in this version of the multiverse, well, Jack had been in the war, one of the last wars here on American soil, and he had done his responsibility as a soldier, and he was done. And they gave him some bread, and they gave him a little money, and they sent him off to seek his fortune. Now, the bread lasted a little while, the money a little while longer, but both of them ran out when he was around Nebraska. See, he was trying to make his way out to California to see if he could find his fortune there. But he was in Nebraska without food, without money, in the middle of those rolling hills. It was starting to get dark, and a storm was coming in. Now, he was starting to look around, see if there was a place that he could shelter. There were those lone trees that stand out in the middle of those long hills. And he was thinking that might not be a good place to stop for the night. And he came around a bend, and there, as if his prayer had been answered, there was a little farm. And it was a sweet little house, one of those classic barns right next to it. And he dusted himself off as much as he could. He made his way up to the door. He gave it a knock. And a farmer's wife opened it. She was a pretty thing, except for her face. Her face did not look very happy to see him. But Jack took off his cap and said with a smile on his face, "Good evening, ma'am. I wonder if there's a little bit of work here, maybe for a meal and a spot by your fire this evening." She looked him up and down. "No. There is no work for you in this house, no spot for you by the fire in this house. You can take yourself down the road before my husband gets home, and I tell him to chase you off." She slammed the door in his face. Now, as Jack turned on his heel to head on out to the road again, the first raindrop started to fall, and he thought, don't really want to be out in this. And he looked around, and all that was there was the barn, and he thought to himself, well, she said there's no spot for me in the house, but she didn't necessarily say anything about the barn. So he made his way into the barn. He nodded hello to the cow. He climbed his way up into the hay loft. He made himself a bed, and he lay down in it. He thought, well, if I'm not going to be fed, at least I will be dry. And he lay back on that hay, and he could see through the hay door, the barn loft door. He could see down the road where that storm was starting to pick up speed, with the lightning flickering just as that light was falling. And he noticed someone walking down the road toward that little farmhouse. He studied that person, that big black hat, the long black coat. It was the parson. Parson was coming down the road through that storm to that little house. And Jack thought, oh, this is going to be funny. I'm going to watch the parson be turned away in the middle of a storm. I will have entertainment if I have anything. And he sat there and he watched, and the parson came up to the door and knocked on it. And the farmer's wife opened it, and she had a different greeting for that parson. She fell on his neck and started kissing him. And Jack thought, wow, they really appreciate religion out here in Nebraska. And he was invited in. And Jack could see through that little window. The parson was sat down right in front of the table. Farmer's wife brought out a lovely leg of mutton and a jug of cider and a beautiful apple pie. And the two of them sat down, making cow eyes at each other while they tucked into that meal. And Jack was watching this happen. And then he heard a horse whinny, and he looked down the road. And through that storm was a wagon being pulled by an old horse and a man who looked very much like a farmer. And those two people in the house had heard that horse, and it was as if something had changed. Because all of a sudden, Jack watched as that cider was put up into the rafters, as the apple pie was hid under the cabinet, and that leg of mutton was shoved into a cupboard. And Jack listened as the farmer brought the horse and the wagon in and put them away in the barn below, and then watched as the farmer made his way towards the house. Jack was looking through that window, seeing what would happen to the parson as they were running around, trying underneath the table, behind the curtains. And finally, the parson himself was stuffed into a barrel with a lid put on tight. Farmer came in the house. Farmer's wife gave him a peck on the cheek. And then they sat down, and she didn't pull out the mutton. Oh, she pulled out this really thin pot of soup, and she spooned up a bowl for her husband and a bowl for herself, and they sat down to eat their meal in what looked like silence. Jack had seen all of this, and he thought, well, maybe there's a good meal and a good story out of me for me out of this. He made his way down out of the hayloft, and he ran across the yard until he was at the door of that little farmhouse, and he knocked, and the farmer opened it. Good heavens, sir, what are you doing out in a storm like this? Come on in. Oh, thank you, said Jack, shaking his coat off. I got caught in the storm, but I'm happy to do any honest work if you have any food or a spot by your fire to spare. Of course, said the farmer. We have that for anybody coming along in the road, with especially weather like this. Come on in. Now, we don't have very much to eat, but I'm sure my wife can find you a bowl of the soup we're having tonight. Why, thank you, said Jack. And when he walked into the kitchen, the farmer's wife, her face froze in this grimace. And she took a bowl from the cupboard and she put some soup into it and she set it in front of Jack. Jack, thank you, ma'am. This looks lovely. And they sat there eating their soup, and the farmer asked Jack, so, where have you been traveling? Where are you from? And Jack told him, well, I was in the war, and now I'm looking for my fortune. Oh, really, said the farmer. That sounds fascinating. Did you see much action? I saw enough to know I don't want to see any more, said Jack. And then he said, I was meeting a lot of people when I was in the army. I even met a man who could do magic. Now, I'm not as good as him, but I would be happy to repay this fine dinner by making some magic for you folk. Oh, really, said the farmer. What can you do? Card tricks? Can you pull a rabbit out of your hat? Oh, no, nothing so fancy as that, said Jack. But I can make food appear. I mean, what would go very well with this meal would be some cider, wouldn't it? Oh, it would be amazing, said the farmer. But, we haven't had cider here for quite a few months now. Well, let me think about this, said Jack. And he needed a magic word. Does anyone have a magic word? Sha-la-la, said Jack. And I think, said Jack, with that magic word, you'll find some cider up in the rafters there. And the farmer went over and he pulled the cider down. Oh, my goodness. It's a full jug of cider. It's a full jug. It looks just like the kind we have. And he poured out the cider for himself and Jack and his wife. And the farmer's wife took a full gulp of that cider. As Jack said, this is fine. This is very fine to have some cider. But you know what's good with some cider is some mutton. Oh, said the farmer, that would be amazing. I would love some mutton. But, we haven't had some for a while. Oh, said Jack, let me think of another magic word. Let's see. Let's try la-boom, la-la-boom. And so I think if you look now underneath the counter there, you'll find some mutton. And indeed, the farmer found some mutton underneath the counter there. Oh, this is fabulous, said the farmer. This is really some magic that we're seeing tonight. And so they made into that mutton and drinking the cider. And the farmer's wife, it seemed she couldn't eat very quickly. She was seeming to be a little tense. And Jack said, the end of a meal like this, it would be a shame not to have a little pie. I mean, you think apple pie would be all right? Oh, of course, said the farmer. And so Jack came up with another word. Beans, he said. And I think you'll find the apple pie in the cupboard over there. And the farmer took the apple pie out and they ate it with the cider. And it was such a night. They drank that whole bottle. They ate that whole apple pie. Oh, the farmer repaid Jack. Well, he wanted to. But no, said Jack. I don't think it would be appropriate for you to pay me for this kind of thing. In fact, some say that magic is the work of the devil. And so whenever I finish with magic at the end of the night, I always try to conjure up a parson to bless me so that I will not be taken down into the dark place after I go. Do you mind if I conjure up a parson? Oh, that'd be a miracle indeed, said the farmer. The parson never comes out this far. Well, let me think about this. I'm going to do one more magic word, and it's going to be holy moly. And then he went over and he opened up the barrel, and the parson stood up. Oh, what am I doing here? He said. I seem to have been magicked here to this barrel in your house, dear farmer. Now he blessed Jack, he blessed the farmer and his wife, and made his way out into that storm without another word. And the farmer was sure appreciative. Now Jack didn't sleep in front of the fire that night. Now Jack slept in the finest bed that they had in that house with a soft cover over him. It was the best sleep he had had since he had left home. And the next morning, it seemed as if the magic had continued, for there was magically eggs and bacon and some very fine pancakes to be had with the coffee for breakfast. Now, before Jack left, the farmer pulled him aside and said, I have to pay you for that night. Last night, it was such a treat, and I only have this. And he gave Jack $5, which was a powerful amount of money at that time. And Jack nodded his thanks and made his way down the road. And as he made his way down the road, one turn and then another, he was out of sight of the farmhouse, and he came around another turn, and there was the farmer's wife standing in the middle of the road. She approached Jack, and from her apron pocket, she took another $5 and she put it into Jack's hand. She says, thank you for the magic last night. I hope we never see you around here again. Jack nodded his head and said, you probably won't, ma'am. He made his way down the road with that $10 in his pocket. And it was all gone before he made it to California, but that is another story.
Amazing.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Amazing.
Wow.
Wow. Love that.
Fresco.
Wow.
Thank you for all the magic words.
Get word.
What a great story. Thank you.
And
oh, they certainly loved religion in those parts.
They do. They appreciate religion.
That was so lovely. What do you have coming on up other than the obvious?
Right now it's all about the womb fruit, as I've heard somebody put it. The baby's on the way, and we've got about a month and a couple weeks before I transition to a new big story. But I think what it is that once we get, see, I don't want to say into the stride of things, because I've heard you never really get a stride as a parent. You just kind of endure. Once we have learned to endure and enjoy, then I think I'm hopeful we'll be doing a Stories with Spirit in October. We'll definitely be doing one in December, because we always do one to celebrate being Stories with Spirit for another year. And so it's going to be all about bringing that new little storyteller into the world and seeing how that goes. So
Excellent.
I will be hopefully, I think I'll be watching a lot of other people as I take this time to take care of baby, get a lot of Zoom shows in.
All right, I'm going to bring up our last teller of the evening.
All right.
We'll do it.
So our last teller of the evening, bringing us home, bringing Jack back, is Ingrid Nixon. And she can be found hither and yon. Her base of operations is Alaska. Right now she's in Portland, Oregon. And we don't know where she'll be next. But wherever Ingrid is, though, it's likely to involve storytelling and stories. And looking at your website, there's a lot of expedition storytelling. And that sounds so exciting. And I hope to go on one of those one day. Those of you might recognize her. She's been on the show doing the Hansel and Gretel from the witch's perspective in Cinderella. If you haven't seen those, you can always write Cooper and he can send you the links. She is voted most likely to encourage Jack to investigate strange sounds coming from the woods and then be the one to save him from whatever he finds in the woods. So bringing us home is Ingrid Nixon.
Oh, thank you, Rachel Ann. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. It is really lovely to be with you and to be with Jack. Now, Jack grew up on a farm. Growing up, he saw the same fields, the same trees, but there was a point when he was a young man when he suddenly thought, there is a great big world out there. So he turned to his parents and he said, I'm going to head out and seek my fortune. And his parents said, oh, good. So Jack's mom said, well, Jack, now as you head out, I can bake you a cake. I can make you a small cake and send you out with my blessing, or I can make you a big cake and send you out with my curse. What'll it be? And Jack said, You know, Mom, you've always put these weird stipulations on your acts of kindness. I don't get it, but I have to plan for a long trip, so I would like a big cake, please. So Jack's mom set about to make him a big cake, and Jack packed up, and when he was ready to go, his mom came and gave him that big cake, and then she said, well, Jack, I guess your curse is that you have me as your mother. And Jack said, Mom, if that's the worst of it, I'll take it. And he gave her a peck on the cheek. And then he headed on down the road because he knew he'd be walking past the field where his father was working. And sure enough, when Jack's dad saw Jack walking along, he threw down his hoe and he ran over and he said, Son, I just wish you well as you head out into this world, but I want to give you something. And Jack's father pulled out of his pocket a small gold snuff box. And Jack said, Dad, you know that I don't use tobacco products. And he said, no, this is something special. Now, you take this with you, and if you get in trouble, like really bad trouble, now, if you think you are going to die, and only then, open this box. And Jack said, Dad, that's amazing. Where did you get this thing? And Jack's father said, well, as this is a folk tale, that is not adequately explained. But good luck, son. And they shook hands, and Jack headed down the road. Now, Jack walked and walked, and he walked some more. And in time, he ate up all that big cake. And it was getting on towards one evening where Jack's walking along the road, and he saw up on the hillside a modest castle. And he thought, well, I'm awfully thirsty, and they're bound to have a well on the backside of that castle. They surely won't mind if I come and get a drink. So he made his way up behind that castle. Sure enough, there was a well. He was getting a drink of water when all of a sudden he heard, yoo-hoo! And he turned around, and there was this beautiful young woman standing in the backside of that castle. She said, now, if you're thirsty, you're bound to be hungry. So come on in and I will feed you. So Jack made his way into that castle, and he sat down at the table, and that young woman brought some bread and cheese and some milk, and she sat down, and the two of them had a snack. Now, her name was Stella, and she was smart, and she was funny, and there was this point where she took a sip of her milk, and when she put her glass down, she had one of those white milk mustaches, and Jack's heart just went bum, 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 bum. Well, Jack, he took a sip of his milk, and when he put his glass down, he had a white milk mustache, and Stella's heart went bum, 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 bum. So it got really late. Stella went to bed in the castle, and Jack went outside, and he slept under the stars. And then in the morning, Stella brought him out a cup of hot cocoa, and as Jack was sipping that, he looked at her and he said, Stella, you're something really special, and I'd like to marry you. Will you marry me? And she said, oh, Jack, I feel exactly the same way. Come on, let's go tell my father. So they made their way into the castle. And as they're going through these corridors, suddenly Jack's thinking, Stella lives in a castle. She's a princess. And that was just as Stella threw open the doors of the throne room, and there was a throne, and there was a king, and he had a crown on his head, and they went walking right up to that man, and Stella said, Dad, I want you to meet Jack. And Jack, I want you to meet my dad, the king. Now, Jack, he had never met royalty before, but he had read a lot of books, so he bowed really low, and he stood up, and he said, Your Majesty, I met your daughter, Stella, and she's something really special. So we've decided that we're going to get married. And the king said, Wait, you've decided? You've just met my daughter and then decided that you are going to marry her without even asking my permission? Stella said, Dad, we've talked about this. You know that I don't need to ask for your permission. And the king said, Daughter, would you just humor me for a minute? The king turned to Jack. Now, okay, obviously my daughter is smitten with you, but I can't help but feel like you just can't marry her without doing a task for me. Yes, a task. What can you do? Now, Jack had grown up on a farm. He had done all sorts of chores, and if there was something new that he put his mind to, he could figure it out. So Jack just kind of shrugged and he said, well, I can do Anything. And the king said, anything. Huh, okay, well, I tell you what, see on that hillside right over there, I would like for you to build me a golden castle. I want a gold castle, really gaudy. And I would like it to be standing on 12 golden pillars, not 11, not 13, but 12. And I would like to have it all done by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And if it is not, then you will die. Okay? Good luck. And he slipped off the throne and slipped out a back door of the throne room. Now, this was not at all what Jack had in mind, but he was obligated. And he turned to Stella and she shrugged. And Jack knew that there was no way he could fulfill what the king had asked of him. But Jack was adept at living in the now. And he knew that he had at least one day with Stella. And so they had a lovely time together. And then that night, Jack slept in a guest room of the castle, and he slept very well. I have your last day on earth, or your last night on earth be a poor night's sleep. And he woke up the next morning about 7:45, knowing that at 8 o'clock there would be no golden castle on the hill and he would die. This would be an excellent time to open that golden snuff box. So Jack sat up on the bed and he tipped back that lid. And all of a sudden, 3 little red men just boom, sprang out of that box. They landed on the floor. They said, "We're here to do your bidding. What do you need? What do you need? Anything, anything." And Jack said, "Anything?" And so he told them about the golden castle on 12 pillars and that it needed to be done at 8 o'clock. And they said, "We are on it." And they were gone. And at 8 o'clock, there was the golden castle on 12 pillars. So Jack went and found Stella, and the two of them went and found the king. And the king looked up and he said, "Yes, there will be a wedding." Now Jack, as he was getting onto his wedding coat, the valet was helping him on. He was so excited. He forgot all about that golden snuff box and he left it in the pocket of his old coat. And then he ran off for the ceremony. And it was as the valet was folding his jacket that he felt that golden snuff box. He pulled it out. He tipped back the lid. 3 little red men jumped out, landed on the floor. "We are here to do your bidding. What do you need? What do you need? Anything." And the valet said, "Well, I never really liked my job. So what do you say we take that golden castle and we go across the ocean now?" And boom, it was gone. Now the wedding ceremony was just about to take place when the king looked up on the hill and saw that the golden castle was missing. And the king said, "Wait. Jack, the golden castle is gone. Now you made that castle. Now you must find it. I will give you 1 year and 1 day to find that golden castle and bring it back here. And if you do not, you will die." And Jack said, "Your Majesty, no problem. I will get that castle." And he reached into the pocket of his wedding coat and he discovered that the golden snuff box was gone. But he maintained a calm face. He turned and looked at Stella, and she said, "Oh, Jack, you can do anything." And she gave him a peck on the cheek, and then Jack turned, and he started walking. He headed on down the road. He had no idea how he was ever going to find that golden castle on the 12 pillars if he didn't have that golden snuff box. But he walked and he walked and he walked some more, and he lost all track of time. And there was one night, in the moonlight, Jack was walking along the road in an unfamiliar place when he heard, coming from the woods, voices. And he turned and he began to walk through the woods toward those voices. And then all of a sudden before him, he heard a very authoritative voice say, "Halt!" And he looked around and discovered that before him, there was a small mouse in full body armor. And just then Jack felt this, and these 2 pink, sticky tongues tongues grabbed onto his arms. They belonged to frogs. And it was that small mouse with that authoritative voice who said, "You are an intruder. You have not been invited to this council. We will take you to our kings." So the tiny mouse turned, and the mouse and the two frogs escorted Jack through the forest toward those voices. And as they got closer, Jack could see that there was a fire. And then there were animals gathered around the fire. And as he joined that circle of animals, he could see that there were many mice and many frogs. And the rest of them were birds of all shapes and sizes. And there were 3 magnificent chairs, thrones. And on one there was a mouse, on one there was a frog, and on one there was a bird, and they each wore a crown. And as Jack approached the circle, everybody was talking and laughing, but as he joined the circle, suddenly all eyes were on Jack, and everyone was silent. And it was the Mouse King who said, "You were not invited to this council. Why are you here?" And Jack said, I don't mean to intrude, but I am on a quest." And it was a Frog King who said, "Quest? Tell me about this quest." And Jack explained everything about the golden castle and the 12 pillars and how it disappeared and how he had to find it in a year and a day, and if he didn't, he would die. And it was the King of the Birds who said, "Rock! Jack wants a castle. Rock! Anyone seen a castle? Rock!" And all the animals looked at one another and they shook their heads until the eagle entered into the circle. And the eagle said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I was on a transoceanic flight the other day. I was flying at about 5,000 feet with a slight wind from the south to southeast. When I saw up ahead on the far shore, there was the golden castle on 12 pillars." Jack said, "Oh, you saw the castle? Can you take me there?" And the eagle said, "It's getting light outside. Let me just file a flight plan." And with that, the 2 frogs released Jack, and Jack prepared to climb onto that eagle's back when suddenly there was a small frog and a small mouse, and they said, "Take us with you. You never know when we can be of assistance." Jack figured he needed all the help he could get, so he tucked a frog and he tucked a mouse into each of his vest pockets, and then he climbed on that eagle's back. And after the eagle had given the safety briefing, the eagle said, "Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." And whew, they were off, and they were flying across the ocean at about 5,000 feet, and they flew and they flew and they flew some more. And then on the far shore, there it was, ooh, the golden castle on 12 pillars. They landed on a nearby hill to sort of suss the situation. And it was then that Jack said that it was great to find the castle, but what he really needed was that snuff box. But he said, "Look at that castle. It could be anywhere. To find it in that castle, it will be impossible." And it was that the mouse said, "Impossible? Nothing is impossible." And the mouse turned and it whispered into the eagle's ear, and the eagle nodded. And the mouse said, "We'll be right back." The mouse climbed on the eagle's back and they flew off toward that castle. And they came back a couple of hours later. And that mouse was in a black commando uniform, and he had on a utility belt. And he walked up to Jack and he said, "Jack, is this the golden snuff box you're looking for?" Oh, Jack took that box. He said, "Where did you get this? How did you get it?" And the mouse began to explain that how the eagle had flown to a window where the mouse could look in, and the mouse could see the golden snuff box. And so he lowered himself on a titanium string, a wire, and as he was lowering himself, Jack started to hear dun, 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 dun. Where is that music coming from? Dun, 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 dun. And he was just able to focus back on the mouse when the mouse said, "Ha ha. Mission accomplished." So Jack, with that snuff box in his hand, he, the frog, and the mouse jumped on the eagle's back, and soon, whoo, they were flying back across the ocean. But Jackie was so excited to have that snuff box that he had to look at it one more time. And as he undid his hand, something bumped him, and suddenly the box started falling down, down, down toward the ocean, just down, down, down. They were really high up. Down, 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 down. Jack thought he was going to lose that snuff box in the water for sure, but all of a sudden there was this pink tongue that just went down and just grabbed that snuff box, and the frog reeled it in and said, I'm going to hold on to this until we get back to the castle, okay? And so it was. They flew back to that modest castle. And when they landed, Jack climbed off that eagle's back and he said, thanks, guys. And the eagle said, thank you for flying the friendly skies. And Jack made his way into that modest castle, into the throne room, just as the king was saying, well, it has been a year and a day, and there's no Jack. And even if Jack does come back with that castle, he will die. Jack said, not so fast. Stella looked up. She had tears streaking her cheeks, but she saw Jack. She ran over. She threw her arms around him. And don't you know it? I mean, in a heartbeat. That golden castle was back on the hill, standing on its 12 pillars. And there was a wedding. And then Jack and Stella and the king and Jack's parents, they all moved into that golden castle on 12 pillars. And as far as I know, they all lived happily ever after.
Woo. Amazing.
Yes.
You are great.
I love the story and I love the sound effects.
That was wonderful.
Oh, that was so much fun.
Mission Impossible and everything.
What a great story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So wonderful.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. That was good fun. You'll need to unmute yourself so people can find out where you'll be next.
Yeah. So things coming up. Well, just so folks know, every month on public radio, I host a public radio show, Storytelling, featuring some of the world's finest storytellers. And people can listen to past episodes on my website, ingridnixon.com. And coming up in August, early August, it's on my website as well. I am part of the Liars Festival, which is hosted by Anne and Norm. And that will be a full day of lying. But then in the meantime, I'm headed up to the Arctic, Greenland, Baffin Island, and the Northwest Passage. So I'm going to be on the road for 2 months, sharing stories of great Arctic exploration and also traditional stories, Inuit stories. Yeah, just some really, really wonderful, exciting tales of daring do of Arctic exploration coming up. So yeah.
That sounds amazing.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds fantastic. So a lot of those links will be going out in the after show notes. And thank you so much. That was fun. That was good fun. I think Cooper is going to pop back up here in just a moment. There we go.
All right. I get to do my end of show announcements. Thank you so much to Simon and Paul and Ingrid for joining us. We got the three of the TBD tellers all on the same show. This is one of those ones as we were putting together, we were like, okay, I've never heard Ingrid do a Jack story, but I want to. I want to hear Paul do a Jack story, and I know Simon does them. So thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. I see there are a couple of questions about the recording popping up in the chat. So part of the thing, I have to download the recording. I have to upload the recording. Magic has, computer magic has to happen. The recording will go out at 12 p.m. tomorrow, Mountain Daylight Time. So whenever that works out for wherever you're at. So in about 16 hours-ish is when the recording will go out. I have to do so. I have to get it, processed. Also, there's an email you already have at this point that will have all the links, all the shows people have been talking about, all the ways to get in touch with these amazing tellers. And if you feel that the art that you experienced tonight was worth something to you, in that email are the many ways that you may express that to us. We have felt that doing this on Pay What It's Worth has been incredible. It allows people who, I know there are some people on fixed incomes who are really joyful to be able to join us, and that is what they have to offer, and there are people that are able to give more. So if you are able to give, we gladly accept that, and we thank you for being here, because again, otherwise I'm just a weird guy talking at my wall in my basement. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for letting us have faces to tell at, even if you're across the world from us. So thank you so much. So that concludes the official portion of the evening. Usually what we do now is we spend about 30 minutes just chatting and answering questions and seeing if people have questions. Sometimes, we get really into one fairy tale. Sometimes we do a whole bunch of different fairy tales. So what I do here is I kick it into gallery mode so I can see everybody. And I'm going to remove the spotlight from myself and move myself into gallery mode. And then I'm going to remember tonight that I have to allow y'all to be able to unmute themselves. So if you know about it, at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says reactions. If you click that, there's an option to raise hand, which is useful for us because it jumps folks. We can call on people. If that's problematic for you, feel free to put questions into the chat and or just, get our attention. Lisa, hey.
Hey, I just wanted to ask Ingrid how she came up with this story. It was so amazing. I loved every second of it, but I just wondered, where did it come from?
I found the story online in I believe it's the Sacred Stories website. I may have that slightly wrong, but it's a Welsh jack tale. Yeah, and it's actually quite epic. So I had to do a fair amount of compression for that one, but the nuggets were there.
Loved it. I just loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Love your hair.
Oh.
I will say I saw someone post into the chat commenting on Ingrid's voices and facial expression, which is, you have to see it and hear it. The first time I ever heard Ingrid was the story that we brought her for doing Hansel and Gretel, and the line, "What sauce goes well with boy?" is just burned into my mind, and it's amazing. Lardell, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, liked hearing the stories and the styles tonight. I was going in and out, so I apologize if I forget anything. But anyway, going on to Rachel, I thought it was an interesting story of how you put the cake and the curse. So I'm just wondering, how did you connect with that Jack story, and how were you able to navigate how to tell it?
The cake and the curse, which the cake and the curse is an Ingrid's one, I think. Mine is the one with the apple pie and the magical words.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Rachel. Okay, all right then. Yeah, but you can answer that part first, and then Ingrid can answer hers. I'm sorry, I just mix it up. Sorry. Yeah, you see what happens.
I know, when you get so many Jack stories, it's all of the same person. So, with mine in particular, it's funny, guys. I was just chatting with Andrea about this. In this, the Jack story with the magic and the bringing the food out and all that kind of stuff. That one, it just to me feels like one of those classic Jacks, that he's going to see some mischief to be made and he's going to make it. And so for me, it was more just finding the characters and putting it where I now have a couple stories that happen in Nebraska, which is not on purpose. It just seems like that's where things happen right now in the stories that I put in set in America here. But it just seems like one of those places that if Jack was on a lonely road and found himself at a farm, he'd make some mischief. So that's how that one came about. Though I love Ingrid. I love that. I'm curious about Ingrid's part, because I love that whole first part about weird attachments to pastries.
Well, in so many of those Jack tales, when his brothers are involved, they select the large cake and get the curse, and then Jack, being modest, gets the small one. So that's something that occurs in a fair number of them. And it's never really occurred to me why, or I mean, it's never like made sense to me why Jack's mother would want to curse him for a large cake. So I was just kind of like, well, who knows?
But anyway, Ingrid, like again, my apologies for the mix-up. But anyway, that was so good in terms of how you started that. I was like a cake and a curse. It's like imagine if Jack would have chosen the curse. That would have been very interesting.
Well, she made it pretty mild by being the curse is I'm your mother, and he's a forgiving young man.
I think that someone just posted this in the chat that they were thinking they liked the few touches of casual meta in Ingrid's story. Mom, why are you putting all these weird stipulations on things? Since this is a folktale, this part isn't explained. And I think Paul is also really good at this play. You're the Eagle airline, right? This fairy tale world that also suddenly has 78s in it. And how do we bring those bits forward? And I don't know, Paul or Ingrid, do you want to talk about a little bit about that, like how we play with the fairy tale world, and it doesn't always have to be, sort of medieval fantasy, right?
Go for it, Paul.
Someone's gonna have to unmute.
Yeah, I mean, I am honestly fairly new to like folk and fairy tale telling, as you know, Cooper, and you were the first fairy tale I ever told was actually on one of these shows a year and a half ago, and I fell in love with it. But most of the stuff I do actually does have an element of like what I think of as sort of postmodernism and magical realism. So for those of you who don't know, like any of the rest of my work, like I set a lot of stories sort of in places that are simultaneously very reasonably believable and impossible. Like, like a trailer park where everyone there works in a pea punching plant, which is the factory where they punch peas until they're black-eyed. And that's the kind of like that almost all of my work kind of exists in those kinds of spaces. So what I've found with folk and fairy tales for me is that if I can find a way to sort of reverse engineer that, to sort of start at the place that seems less reasonably relatable for the audience, and then find ways to sort of overlay some more relatable elements in that way. Not only is it more relatable, but it's also just instantly entertaining. I mean, the idea of the 78 was sort of the thing that kind of really excited me about this story. I fell in love with the story itself, the original story. But whenever I discovered that I could put a puddle record player in it, I definitely knew I had to tell it.
Ingrid, do you want to talk a little bit about your sort of like how you that breaking the sort of classic fairy tale world?
Well, I think it's just kind of realistically thinking about, how would a full-grown person get on an eagle and have these relationships with a mouse and a frog, and just trying to shape that in a way that makes some semblance of sense. And then it just lent itself in my mind to fun. So yeah, just playing.
Thank you both. Other questions? Anybody else? Simon, how did it feel to actually be the straight man of the group?
Well, I don't know if I was a straight guy. I was the one that like changed the end of the story. I mean, the original, the giant gets turned into a piece of ratatouille, right, when he hits the ground. I grew up as a kid listening to this story. My parents would tell me this story, and it never sat well with me. And it's one of those stories that I've never enjoyed telling that much. And it wasn't until, Jack there are different variations of the story. So there's one variant where there's another little man shows up and says, all of the stuff in that castle is your inheritance. The giant stole it from your dead father, right? But even when I told it that way, I didn't like it. And so basically it was kind of like, so what if the giant didn't die? And what if he comes up and says, you are bad people, right? Which is the way they are. And so yeah, it was basically taking the traditional story and then just like flipping the end over on its head. So, but yeah, the straight man, yeah, I guess. I don't mind it. I like being a straight guy.
Yeah, one of
Straight
those
guy with a weird mind. I don't know. Whatever.
one of those things I think that I just love about fairy tales, right? That was my response to our Rapunzel show of, this is a story I just have no, like, it wasn't even that I didn't like Rapunzel, I just had no in on it. And which one of the things I love about these shows is we've gotten plenty of tellers, myself and Rachel included, where you're like, I don't know what I would tell for that, but let me go find out. And you get people twisting and shaping because the core of the story doesn't sit right in some way with them, and still staying true to it. Sorry, trying to read. Could Ingrid talk about the Liars Festival? That you mentioned that, and I think Anne and Norm are here. I don't know if one of you wants to chat a little bit about what that is.
Actually, if Norm is on, he should go for it.
He just literally left his screen.
Oh,
no, he's back. He's back.
Yes.
Norm, do you want to chat for a moment?
Run for the hills is what Norm was doing. No, yes, it's August 5th. We're having our second annual Good Liars Festival. They're the Good Liars. We were started as an alternative. We have a show quarterly, but every year now, I guess, we're having a little festival. And these are good lies, and they're good because we're not trying to take advantage of you or anything bad about you. These are for entertainment purposes. We do not want you to vote for us. There's no voting at all. Don't worry about it. You won't have to go through armed people to go put your ballot in. All you have to do is tune in. It's free. It's pretty much pay what you want. We have a great lineup this year. We actually pared it back. We were 8 hours last year. We're only 6 hours this year. So, and we've got some great tellers. Ann Rutherford is a 5-time winner of the Northwest Folk Life Liars Contest. We have Simon. We've turned Simon into a liar. Even when he tells a folk tale, he cannot lie. He can't do something bad. That's why he's good. He's good, I tell you. And of course, Ingrid has been in every one of our shows because she was our partner in doing Grimm's Tales and many things before the pandemic. So anyway, we've got a great lineup. Ed Stivender is going to tell a lie, and Andy Offit-Irwin. And we've got 3 of the best liars in Texas, DC Cornish and Bernadette. And anyway, it's a great lineup. It's going to be very fun. It's August 5th, and you can find out more at ann-norm.com.
Thank you, Norm. I just saw this go into the chat. The link to that will be it's in the email you will all have already received. That goes to whoever registered for the event. If you scroll down under Ingrid's information, it's right there. So click on that, check that out.
May I ask a question? Ingrid, have you found that your hairstyle has changed anything in your storytelling?
Have I found that my hair has changed? No.
Really?
No.
You don't feel freer about anything? It's just the same.
I can't play Rapunzel quite the same. But
no.
Yeah.
Oh, you looked really good with a shaved head. Those
Yeah,
pictures
she's great. Yeah.
One more just point of housekeeping here. Someone asked for a link. Please share the chat log with the recordings. The problem is if I record the chat log, I also record sort of like the back end of Rachel, Ann, and I like sorting out some of the problems, and it's sort of there's the backside of it as well. So if you would like the chat, if you go down to the chat, there should be some 3 little dots at the bottom of your chat box. If you click on those dots, you should be able to save the chat. And so unfortunately, I don't generally share my chat because it has a bunch of the back end on it as well. Basically, you save your chat, so any direct chatting is saved with that. Unlike originally when, you know, pandemic happened and the hosts could see private chats, and that got squashed pretty quickly. I remember those heady early days of Zoom. A question here that was aimed at me. Your story had great momentum and energy, as if Jack got on a roll and completely changed the situation. How did you prepare to tell the story and decide to develop it? Jack the Hat and the Magic Stick is one of the first stories I ever developed. The venue that would become Rachel Ann and I's haunt for many years was a distillery here in Longmont, Colorado called Still Cellars, which was unfortunately a victim of the pandemic, which is so sad. But the first show that I did there was a show about spirits. So both the ghostly kind and the kind you drink, because it was a distillery. And I was looking for stories, and there's a website called Sacred Texts, which is sort of the Project Gutenberg for fairy tales and folktales and mythology. And I go there and I type in things like whiskey, and I see what pops up. And I found this story, and it's originally about 2 paragraphs long, and it's Jack's married. Jack has a wife, and there are these 3 men that try to bilk him, and the core of it's all there. And I ran with it, and I'm still telling it 10 years later. Or 9 years later. And it's been one of those ones that really stuck. A lot of my early stuff has passed away. So that's how I sort of decided it. I think it's one of those ones that, and I think other tellers can probably talk about their processes here. Some of my stories I do really intricate writing for, and some I just sort of try to get out of the way and see what Jack wants to do. And in this case, it was a little bit like a lot of that wordplay just developed from running the characters and this sort of almost slightly manic nature of the story. And can I lean into more of this sort of just continual chaos of the story? Other stuff. I have to catch up on the chat. Any other questions? Looks like people are starting to say goodnight. Any other thoughts from tellers? Thank you all so much for being here. Paul and Simon, it's a duo. It's good.
It is quite the duo.
It's good.
Yeah. Simon found a hat.
I was gonna say, you guys look like brothers.
Oh.
Partners in crime.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
more
selling
like
us
it.
something.
Oh.
A very small person is going to come and retrieve that hat if you're not careful.
Lisa asked, I would have to look for the link. I usually just type sacred texts into Google. Give me a moment and I will find that link.
Thank you.
Sacred-texts.com.
Hi, Misty.
Yeah, very good resource for you're looking for fairy tales or folk tales or mythology, or it's the website is a little bit the late 90s, but it does its job really well.
And that may be the website where I also found the Jack and the Golden Snuff Box. Yeah.
Okay.
That might
Great.
be.
Thank you.
That's an excellent website. Excellent resource.
It has a lot of the epics on there as well, and also a lot of religious stories. It's not just folk tales. It's a lot of different stuff. It's an amazing resource.
And will you put the website in the link? I mean, in what you send out to?
The one has already gone out.
Okay, so what was it again?
I just put it in the chat. It is sacred-texts.com. And if you just type in sacred texts to Google, it will be the first thing on the list.
If you click on it and open it, it will be saved on your computer.
Thank you, Val.
Wait, did I hear Paul say there were ethics in storytelling? This is a new thing to me. A new whole idea that there.
I think Simon said epics.
Epics. Did say epics, and there are epics.
There are ethics, yes.
Ethics or epics? What are we talking about?
Yes.
So yes is the answer to the question. Yes, the ethics is that you don't take an original piece of work and tote it as your own. That would be an unethical thing to do. I think it's better if you can find more than one version of a story so that you can craft your own out of 2 or 3 or 4 different versions. But epics
is on second.
It's true. And Beowulf would be on third.
Yes,
and
rounding third for home.
Yes, the Ramayan would be on hope. No one's on fourth.
No one's on fourth.
No.
Nobody's on first.
Oh.
Nobody's on.
Oh.
Do I have to separate you two?
Again?
Yes.
Oh.
No, don't. Please don't.
We'd let the performers get, we log on about 30 minutes early to make sure that, the sound's all working, and we let Simon Brooks in. Like, that's not Simon behind Simon's camera.
If you're on early, you're all getting into trouble. That's what I'm thinking.
It is.
It's true.
It's controlled chaos.
Well, I'm relieved to hear their ethics and storytelling. That is a great relief.
Oh, yeah.
I never would have guessed. No, I mean, I didn't mean that the way it sounded.
As Simon said,
I
right?
was joking, Yeah. I hope.
Well, there's no story banning yet, is there?
I don't know what you.
Oh.
I think that could be taken in a couple of different ways. I think there are, to take that, there are different venues that there are certain venues you don't tell certain stories in. We put an R rating on this show because we've had cannibalism on it. We've done dark stories. We've had some really dark stuff here that I wouldn't tell in front of a 3rd grade class.
No, you guys are very ethical, I have to say. I'm just a librarian annoyed with banning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been plenty of that going on, so that's another issue right there. So yeah.
Could you have a stories with a theme of critical race theory? Would that work, Cooper?
I don't know if that's us. I think I don't know. I think putting fairy tale variations critical race theory is provocative in a way that I don't know if we could deliver. I think that.
Well, Cooper, there has been some stories to where you had like some same-sex relationships on here of fairy tales that have done that, but just make sure it's not in a setting to where like they can just cut that, because they've
right. Well, I mean, one of the things, to take these questions honestly, we try to allow a platform here for stories that can push boundaries in ways that we think are interesting. One of my favorite stories I've ever heard here was a trans version of Rapunzel. Danielle Ballone is an amazing teller. We had a Little Red Riding Hood, or not Little Red Riding Hood, a Hansel and Gretel story that the sort of end of that story is smelling the ovens in the Black Forest. It ends with with coming back to the Holocaust. Like this is a space where we can explore some dark subject matter, but as its curators, Anna and I are really pro that we wish to, I think maybe the easiest way is I think we want to punch up, that we want to, that I'm not interested in, we go into some of these fairy tales that there was plenty of racism and sexism. One of the great things we deal with in a lot of fairy tales is sexism and sort of gender roles and the meek princess being one. And so how do you deal with that?
And really, Cooper, that really explains more of like the history of fairy tales. Like when you really think about the original fairy tales and hear the original things, like there's always these type of themes in there, but people don't really know about that.
And also, you get fairy tales are a marker of their time. Some of them are in some cases very liberal and some of them are very conservative for the time period that they're in. And then now and again, we go back and we find fairy tales and we go, oh, wait, we've been fighting these same fights for a really long time. And
history doesn't flow in straight lines, and things ebb and flow.
Indeed.
Many years ago, probably almost 50 years ago, I heard I never remember her name, but a lesbian feminist poet read at Stockton College, and she read a poem based on the Rapunzel story. And she told it from the witch's point of view. And it implied that Rapunzel, or stated, I don't remember, it's been 50, about not quite 50 years. But Rapunzel and the witch had been lovers.
There are many versions of all of these, and that's one of the things we do. Someone just posted a link to Cenga Zolka's blog. Cenga is an amazing Hungarian storyteller and academic, PhDs in pop culture and storytelling, or undergraduate in storytelling, PhD in pop culture, and does some of the most incredible work that if you're interested in things like diversity and representation in fairy tales, her blog is amazing. Really incredible. Cenga literally read a folktale collection from every country on earth that she could get a collection from. Took her like 2 years. She is one of those people that I'm not the only storyteller that goes to Cenga and be like, okay, I heard a fragment of a story very quickly, and she's like, oh yeah, there are 3 versions of that. One from Hungary, one from Lithuania, and one from Bali. Here you go. You're like, she's wild. But her blog is amazing. She had a great blog, which I really like. She does the A to Z April challenge, and she did one on things you assume aren't in fairy tales. So a good stepmother and a pregnant hero, and sort of all of the tropes that we don't, ugly princesses, and where are all those stories? And she does great work. So
it was also theorized, might have been by the same woman, that, again, this is going back, Rumpelstiltskin was actually a woman, because sometimes there would be characters in folk tales that were, they didn't want to say that a woman was doing this, so they would say it was a man. But although I theorized, because there are elements there, that Rumpelstiltskin may have been meant to be a Jew.
The within Germanic, I mean, and here we're here, right? The dwarf characters in Germanic folktales are often Jewish analogs. We see that, and anti-Semitism is an old thing, and we see that in a lot of stories. Though, according to Paul Strickland, the dwarf and the king are the same person, is the magic little man. One of those stories.
And you see, the way folklore works, history isn't much different. There's usually not one, in other words, that there's no reason why all the explanations can't be true, because a character could be, some people, I know what I'm trying to say here, all kinds of elements come together.
That is the folk process. And that's, in a lot of ways, that's what we're all doing here again. These characters have been stock characters, that we see these snapshots. We see collections that are then edited. Janice Del Negro, who has been on our show and is a mentor to Anne and myself, will often comment that when you're reading a fairy tale that's in a collection and there's just a weird missing bit, that you're like, we just jumped 6 years and character relationships have changed. What you're reading is the guy writing it down ran out of ink, like had to go dig in his bag to go get more ink or resharpen a pencil as the teller is continuing to tell, because you're just taking it in longhand from who's telling, pre-recording, that you end up with these situations and then they get edited. One of the things, and this is one of the things that this show is trying to do, we talk about the Brothers Grimm's, and they deeply edited their work. they changed it. None of this was verbatim from tellers, and so here we are doing that all over. Simon, I saw your hand. I'm talking a lot. Oh.
I was just waving good night to Karen.
Oh, good night. Good night, friends. And I too am beginning to turn into a pumpkin. I was up rather late last night. So I think with that, I'm going to say thank you to everyone. Thank you everyone who has stuck and listened to us tell stories and ramble about stories and ask questions about stories. And thank you all so much to Ingrid and Paul and Simon for joining us again. We're so happy that you want to come and play fairy tales with us.
And thank you, Cooper and Rachel Ann.
Yeah, thanks for having us, y'all.
Dang, thanks. Ingrid, I'll listen to your podcast, okay?
Super.
Mhm.